My name is Deborah Lee DeVries, and I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me, having all of this. I am an attorney here in Tucson. I work with the Pima County Attorney's Office as a prosecutor in the Special Victims Unit. Prior to that, I also worked in Maricopa County at the Attorney's Office out there as well. In both offices, I worked on child sexual assault, sexual abuse types of cases, which also involved child prostitution cases. And I've also had the privilege to engage in some international work, working somewhat as a consultant for two different NGOs, one being International Justice Mission, where I worked in Rwanda, and with the American Bar Association's Rule of Law Initiative, and that was in Azerbaijan. So I've seen both how human trafficking looks domestically as well as internationally. And it's really my passion. I love spreading awareness. Every new person that gains some information and awareness on this topic, I feel like is really impactful. Every person counts. And so I'm thrilled that all of you are here, and yeah, thanks.
I'm Jerry Payton, director of Sold No More, which was Streetlight Tucson until we changed our name this year. They put a lot of stuff about us in the program, so I'm not going to mention all that. My daughter was sex trafficked here in Tucson when she was 14, which is about 27 years ago. So this is not new. And she's the one who got me involved about three and a half years ago by bugging me. Like most people, I thought this was an overseas problem. And she kept telling me, no, Dad, it's happening here, and you need to get involved in it. Listen to your kids sometimes. So I did begin this organization almost 3 years ago, because as I did some research myself, one, I found out that there really wasn't much happening in Tucson in terms of awareness or prevention. And I came across others who had been victimized. Some were adults now, who were victimized as children. Some were parents whose children were victimized. And I'm one of those kind of guys that I can't stand to see innocent people be abused. So to me, it wasn't much of a choice. When that's happening, we need to do something about it. So that's one. Plus, I love working with people. Met Deborah last year and Eric almost 3 years ago, and we met a year and a half ago. And that's a great thing for me, is to meet people who have the same kind of passion.
I'm not going. Can you hear me? All right. Because I'm just going to blow that thing out of the water. My name is Eric Breitsky. I'm a supervisory special agent with Homeland Security Investigations. It's the investigative component of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We investigate various criminal law violations of the United States Code, which includes human trafficking, alien smuggling, drug smuggling, weapons smuggling, those sorts of things. Currently, I run an investigative group out in Sells, which is on the Oahu Nation. Those of you who have not been out there, come on out, look around. Prior to that, I was the chief of our human smuggling and trafficking unit at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. And as part of that, I have national programmatic oversight of our trafficking and alien smuggling programs. So I had a lot of interaction policy-wise at the national level with folks, both within the law enforcement community, the Department of Justice, the FBI, some of the other federal stakeholders, the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as some of the large non-government organizations, community faith-based organizations that are involved in various services. So I've been out here about almost 3 years. I followed my wife out here. I like being married. And we're staying, we're happy. And I am thrilled to be here. This is an evolving process. There really wasn't much going on in Tucson, Southern Arizona in general. And there is a core group of folks now, both on the victim services and advocacy side, and also on the law enforcement prosecutorial side, trying to address the issue. And in addition to giving trainings to some law enforcement folks, this community outreach is a way to sort of raise awareness. Because at the end of the day, we all rely upon those of you who may encounter trafficking, and we rely on making referrals to us so that we can address it.
Okay, well, ours is taped on. So. Right, I hope you can hear me too. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a survivor of trafficking. I was trafficked when I was 16 years old. And it's not like I said, hey, I think I'll be a prostitute. What a great career choice. Somebody asked me if I wanted to go to a party. And I was young, 16, and I wanted to go to a party. So I said, sure. Well, I never got to the party, and it wasn't about a party. You know, he tricked me, got in the car, gave me a drink, and he drugged me, I'm sure, because I woke up, it was dark out, and we weren't at the party yet. So I asked him where we were, and he said, baby, do you know what I am? And I said, no. He said, I'm a pimp. And I said, you know, I laughed at him. I thought he was joking. And he quickly let me know I wasn't joking. He took a gun out, beat me with a gun, told me I had to sleep with this man in this truck, and I was still a virgin. So it was a really scary thing to me. He put me in the man in the truck didn't help me. And when they were done, I got beat up again because I cried too much, he told me. And he said if I ever messed up his money again, you know, he would kill me. And I believed that. So that was kind of how I got in. It's not like it was a choice. So when people think about, I just want you to think about how people get in. We're tricked in. We don't pick that. Nobody would pick that. You know, you either have the gorilla pimp, like the kind I had, or someone who's going to try to kidnap you, or you have Romeo, who says, oh, baby, I love you, you're beautiful, you know, and you want to hear that. You know, everybody wants to hear that. If your kids aren't hearing it at home, or, you know, if they're struggling with love, you know, it's a way for the pimp to get them in. And I think most people do have a pimp, contrary to everyone's belief. Anyway, I got out, I was in for 6 years. I got out when I was 22. And I went through, there wasn't any agencies back then because I'm old, to help get out. I mean, I'll be 50 in May 21st is my birthday. So I'll be 50 pretty soon. Anyway, there was nothing to help. So I was out for a few years, and then my wife-in-law, I'll tell you guys what that means later, told me that she knew of this group I could go to where I could talk about what happened to me. And she was like, you know, you should come with me. It's kind of cool. And so, you know, I was like, well, I don't want to go to a group. But I did go, and it was so, how do I say it? I mean, it relieved me. I was able to go into a room and talk to a bunch of women that went through the same thing I did. And nobody judged me. Nobody told me, you know, what a hoe I was and how horrible I was. Because, you know, back then they said that we chose it and we did it. It was really blaming. So it was wonderful. Anyway, I stayed there I went through their whole program, and I volunteered for another year. I was there for a couple years. And then I went to, they helped me get into college. So I went to college and I got a BSW. And I graduated at the top of my class, Yahoo. And yeah, I got out of there, and I was hired by a place called, actually, it was an extension of the place I went for my own healing. That woman hired me to be a program manager, so I had a supervisory position. It was wonderful. Anyway, she hired me. I worked there, 13 years, and I always did the groups. I held many positions there, but I always did the groups for prostitute women. Because it's like, even today, if I do a group with prostitute women, it helps me heal. I think it's a never-ending process. And there's just something to be said about being in a group with other women, you know, that have been through what you've been through. So anyway, then I decided to get out, and I moved to Tucson because I got tired of shoveling snow. I'm from Minnesota, I'm sorry. So I came here, my brother actually retired from the Air Force, and I came here for his retirement party. And he happened to come back to Minnesota for my dad's generator because he passed, and I rode back with him. And I said, well, you know, if I make it, I make it. And when I got here, I got a job. Actually, I got a job by the state of Arizona hired me for a sex crimes investigator for child protection. But then they fingerprinted me, and 30 years ago I had prostitution records, so they fired me for that. I'll tell you about that later, too. Anyway, from there, I had a couple clients put on the internet, they messaged me and they said, you know, Beth, that would be who I was if it wasn't for you. No, that's not true, but it was very flattering. And it made me feel like I made an impact, you know, that I touched someone's life. And it was 2 different women, so I thought, wow, that is, you know, wonderful. And then I had a third woman message me and say, you know, I'm having trouble with my kids, I want to get my kids back, can you help me with, you know, a lawyer? And I thought, well, sure, I'll be able to find a lawyer through an agency here, you know, because I was like the resource queen in Minnesota. So I looked for an agency, and there was none. I mean, there was nothing for her to go to here. There were no agencies like the one I worked at in Minnesota. Not even in Phoenix. The closest thing I could find was Dignity. And that's like Catholic Charities based, so they're not as free because they're kind of under Children Protective Services. They're not as free to help people like regular NGOs are. Anyway, because of that, that's what made me decide to start a nonprofit here called Willow Way. Actually, a client came up with that name too. The willow tree is the strongest tree in the forest, and it kind of helps you, you know, the branches won't break. They just kind of protect you until you get through it. So that's what the name is about. Anyway, I probably already talked too much, so with that, I'll pass. You can tell your groups.
Thank you so much, each of you. Have experienced this in different ways, some very, very personal, and we appreciate your sharing. For the audience's sake, I think we should start with some basics. So let's talk about how you would define human trafficking and if there are different types. I thought maybe Eric and Deborah, you could talk about who are the traffickers.
I have kind of a quiet voice, so I'll start off by talking about what human trafficking is, and maybe Eric can talk about who the traffickers are, and you can chime in, Eric, in time. So I think the majority of our conversation tonight is focused on sex trafficking, including that video that we just saw. Sex trafficking is definitely a form of human trafficking, but there are different types of human trafficking. The two most common ones are sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And both are present everywhere around the world, almost everywhere around the world. My experience mostly deals with sex trafficking. When I was in Azerbaijan, we did have some actual human organ trafficking, where they kidnap people and basically harvest out all their organs and then leave them to die. So I mean, it can look there's definitely different types. Before I go any further, I should give a disclaimer, being the attorney that I am. All the opinions that I share tonight, they're solely mine. They are not of the Pima County Attorney's Office, nor are they of the Human Trafficking Working Group that I'm a part of as an attorney through the Pima County Attorney's Office. They're all mine. So instead of going through the elements of what constitutes human trafficking, I want to give you just a quick acronym to remember. So if you're out there and you feel like you see a situation that looks a little shady and you think that might be an instance of sex trafficking or human trafficking, something for you to remember is an acronym AMP, AMP. And I'll explain what that is. A stands for act, M stands for means, and P stands for purpose. So for the crime of human trafficking, there are almost always these three elements. What's the criminal act that's being that's criminalized? And for example, I'll take sex trafficking. It's not necessarily forcing a girl to engage in sex acts that constitutes sex trafficking. The criminal act is the harboring, the recruiting, the transporting, the obtaining, those types of acts. That's the criminal act. Now, how do you commit the act? By what means do you commit that act? And that's generally, I'm speaking in general terms, by force, fraud, or coercion. So you're harboring or you're obtaining this girl by force, fraud, or coercion. That's the means. And then P, what's the purpose? And the purpose is for exploitation. Again, the two major types of exploitation that we see are sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. I want to also clarify that when we're talking about minors, in the state of Arizona, we recognize that minors should be treated differently than adults. For one, their brains just don't have the capacity, they're not developed enough to have the capacity to make that informed decision of whether or not to engage in this type of act. So, because we recognize this, the M, the means, the force, fraud, or coercion, is not necessary to prove sex trafficking. So going back to my acronym AMP, you have the act. Let's say the act in this case is harboring. You're housing this girl for the purpose of sexual exploitation. You have sex trafficking right there. So there's no need for any forced fraud or coercion. I know that, a lot of times people are looking for that. What type of, what is the perpetrator doing to force this girl or guy to remain in this position? And you won't see chains, you won't, well, you might, but oftentimes you don't see physical restraints, but yet the girl doesn't leave. In the criminal world, as a prosecutor, when I present my case to a jury, I don't have to prove that there was any force, fraud, or coercion used to keep this girl enslaved, if you will. Having said that, even if it's not a criminal element to the offense, it's very often that you'll see that type of force, fraud, or coercion in a lot of these types of cases.
I don't have a lot to add to it. I mean, a lot of the focus is on sex trafficking, particularly domestic, minor sex trafficking. Within my agency, because we are a transnational organization and investigate transnational criminal activity, a lot of your labor trafficking is going to involve foreign nationals who are either here illegally or who have been brought into the United States on some type of work visa. And it's a particularly vulnerable population because if you're here illegally, you don't want to be sent back, probably you don't want to be exposed to law enforcement. You perhaps come from a country where law enforcement isn't very friendly to you or is corrupt. And in many of the visa situations or these employment-based situations, your legal status in the United States is tied to your employment. So employment goes away, now you're here legally, there's all kinds of bad things that can happen to you. So, trafficking really does run the gamut from, somebody working the street, walking up and down it, to perhaps somebody working as a domestic servant in a household, somebody working in a restaurant or an agricultural field, that type of environment. And when you ask, well, who are the traffickers? It could be anybody. As you described, you've got the gorilla pimp, the guy that keeps the girls in line by putting a beating on them. You've got the guy that befriends them, the romantic lure, marriage offers. You see that a lot transnationally. They'll I love you. You get a girl from a small village in Mexico, Central America. I love you. Come to America with me. We're going to have a wonderful life. All of a sudden, you get to America, and he's already married, and she's not up here to be his wife. She's up here to work for him. And you've got folks in the restaurants. You've got doctors that bring a domestic servant in when you need and decide to keep them locked in the closet for 19 years. True case. It could be anybody, really.
They could even be boys in high schools with your daughters. Sometimes pimps will recruit these, handsome-looking boys in high school to recruit girls, and they teach them how to pick out the vulnerable ones. I heard a story of a woman who shared about picking I forget the term that they use to describe themselves, but it's basically that the average normal girl. So there's like the popular pretty girl, and then there's the one that has really low self-esteem, and then just the average middle girl who, it doesn't really stand out in any way. And then this guy starts to, shower them with compliments, and, she develops a crush on him. And then he's the one who eventually brings the girl to the pimp, or he could be the pimp himself. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an adult. It really could be anyone.
Yeah, I know I'm not one of these guys, but women traffic. We had women from Venezuela where they had been trafficked, and they would keep them, they bring them to America for like 4 months at a time where they had these different stints, and it was a woman that lined this up. And as soon as she got them, she took their passports at the hotel. She said, we have to stay at this hotel, and they're gonna steal your passport, so let me hold on to them for you. And once she got their passports, that was it. They were done. They were just trafficked, and they stayed for their time. Instead of giving them money, they gave them tickets. And at the end of the time, they were supposed to trade in the tickets. Well, at the end of the time, when they were to give the tickets, they didn't pay them all the money. They said, well, the next time you come back, we'll finish up paying. And that's how they got the people to come back again, because they wanted their money. And when they did come back and sign up, they would send the husband or the family, the part of the money, of course, minus much fees, that they still owed them. And that's how they get these women to come back over and over and over. I'm sorry.
Obviously, with the internet being a primary source now of trafficking, who could be on the internet trafficking? Anyone. The case a couple of weeks ago, you might have heard about, Channel 9 did a story on it. 13-year-old girl was being trafficked through Facebook by a man up in Oro Valley, back in my neighborhood, pretending to be a younger man. Set her up for prostitution. The only reason he was busted is the mother in this case was a wise mom who invades her daughter's privacy by checking her Facebook page and found out that this arrangement had been made. So, and obviously he's posing as a young teenager. He was really, I forget his age now, pretty ugly looking when I saw the picture. So they can be anyone, especially when it's on the internet.
So you all really helped us understand a little bit more about what trafficking is. And there are a lot of people in the community that are here that have children and young women and men that are concerned. What type of victim do you see here in Tucson? And how would we be able to be more aware of the danger of a potential situation where someone is being lured into trafficking?
Well, I think,
Sorry,
yeah, it's like, that's a hard question. I
It
mean,
is.
it can be anybody, victim can be anybody, especially those with low self-esteem. I mean, I can't say it enough. Make time for your kids. You gotta make time for your kids, and I know it's hard these days because of our economy. Both parents have to work. But if you don't, they're gonna look for love somewhere. And kids know, they know how to zoom in on it. They just know. So, yeah, wow. I don't think.
Well,
It
I
can
can.
be- Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, let's take a look at one subset. Let's look at domestic minor sex trafficking. Okay, and who are you gonna see involved in this? I think primarily what we see are young girls, underage girls, not necessarily seeing a lot of young boys, and that's probably a social stigma there. I think it exists, but I don't know that it's exposed as much. But if you've got girls who are coming from homes, and it's not always the case, but very often they're difficult homes. Often dad's not there. Often there's a series of men in mom's life. Often there are addiction issues, drug use. Often there's sexual abuse. These girls end up being highly sexualized at a young age. There's physical abuse. A lot of runaways. You run away, you get out on the street. What are you looking for? Well, you're looking for stuff you didn't have at home. You're looking for somebody to love you. You're looking for somebody to take care of you. You end up putting yourself in a situation because you're 14 years old. You're pretty sure you know everything about how the world works. So you're out there on the street and you realize, well, how am I going to eat tonight? Where am I going to get food? Now everybody's sitting here. I don't know anybody's background. I can tell you mine. I know where I'm getting food. And I go to the Fry's grocery store and I'm going to buy something. But you don't have any money and you have no support structure. God forbid you left the community you're from. You went to Tucson, Arizona, from New York, New Jersey. Or you went from Tucson to Vegas. And you don't know where you're going to sleep. The first person that comes up to you and offers to help to buy you a couple hamburgers at the McDonald's, that's your friend. You're going to go with them. And then you start getting, that's the end. That's what pulls you in. You're in such a vulnerable position, you don't have a lot of options. And you see, I see a lot, I think you see a lot, there's a lot of those same themes that you see with some of the young girls.
And I think, I know we look for a label to say, okay, let's figure out how this can happen to us and how this can touch our family, but you know what, it touches your family. It touches you. This has to do, I come from a religious family. We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. My parents, I didn't know what welfare was. They weren't on welfare. I mean, we lived in a small town. I mean, people looked at us and we were an all-American family. This happens to everybody, whether you're rich, whether you're poor. We don't have a place called Prostitutionville in southern Arizona. I mean, these girls and boys don't come from this place. They come from your family, your neighbor's family. I mean, and we can't, I wish we could predict how to stop this from happening. If we could, we wouldn't have any trafficking. You know what I'm saying? We can't give like, how do you say? There's no prevention. I mean, there's prevention words, there's things you can do to be careful, but there's not a surefire way, you know? Just, I think that you're absolutely right. It's being in need. You get out there, and when we are kids, man, I was invincible. I was going to a party. And you know, I tried to fight him. It's like, I didn't have to get beat up that way, but I was like, you're insane. You're crazy. I'm not, you know. But he wasn't hearing that. They don't hear that. And once you get beat down so often, and, you know, they talk about you, it makes you stay in. But I know we're not on that part yet, so.
No, it's
Let
great.
me
Please.
give you a few examples about Tucson victims. Most of these are recent. Some are women who were trafficked as teenagers. In my daughter's case, you know, she was class president, honor student, athlete, championship pianist. And her father, me, was a pastor in one of our largest churches in Tucson. Her boyfriend took a shotgun to himself in the Swirl High School parking lot while she was there waiting for him. That's called post-traumatic stress disorder. We know that now. Didn't know it then. She ran away within a week. What did she need? She needed a place to stay. And she was picked up by 4 men who provided her a place to stay. Not only used her sexually with them and others, but used her to smuggle drugs across the border in Nogales. They still do that, by the way, especially down here. I talked to women on the supposed other side, 10-year-old being sold by her mother for heroin on the Tucson's east side. By the time I met her, she spent 8.5 years hard time for armed robbery. You wonder why some of these people do what they do. Tried being raped at home since you were 10. I know 3 women who were sold out of their own homes because their parents were coke addicts. That's how they supported their brothers and sisters. Recently, we had a 16-year-old girl her mom was a nurse and a very protective mom. But this girl was abused. That's a real, over 80% of the girls have been abused sexually. Makes them more vulnerable once they're out there. She'd been abused when she's 11, raped by a man when she's 15, pregnant, miscarried, rape began at 16, being sold by a 35-year-old guy who addicted her to meth and alcohol. Well, her mom, thankfully, you know, she's rescued, but that mom was all over that girl. There was no lack of interest there. This 13-year-old girl had a very active mom who was protective of her. A couple of cases where the parents didn't know anything. The girls were making relationships on Facebook, guys were meeting up with them. So it's true. One of them was a 20-year-old Mexican national who was literally trafficked across the border, not smuggled. You know the difference, right? Smuggling, I pay someone, a coyote, to get me across the border. Trafficking is, I am taken across the border by someone. That's not my idea. The sad thing now is so many of the women and girls who pay to get smuggled across the border are raped as soon as they're here. Their underwear hung in trees now on the border called rape trees.
Or as part of the thing to get here.
Yeah, and they didn't know that until after they got here. She was trafficked into Tucson, being pimped out here, and she managed to run away, called 911, picked up by Pima County Sheriff. She couldn't speak a word of English. We put her in contact with a translator who helped her get services. The next 3 or 4 days later, she's going to be a witness. They are tailing, surveilling the pimp. They know who he is. She gets a call from Mexico saying, if you're not back by tomorrow, your 3-year-old daughter will be sold. So she's on the bus, she's gone. There was no trafficking case at that point. He was arrested on minor charges. So that's the only case I know of a foreign national brought in. 90% of these female minor victims in America are domestic U.S. girls. These aren't girls brought in from foreign countries. It's cheaper to get them that way. You don't have to smuggle them. It's easier to get them. And the vast majority, again, it's over 80% are runaways. And we have led the nation in runaways for 2 years. 1,000 girls a year run away here. And they need stuff. And there are people out there willing to provide that stuff in exchange for especially sex, and that makes it trafficking.
So how big is the problem in Tucson and Arizona and the US? But let's start right here at home. How big is this problem?
I think it's huge. I mean, and we're talking about the internet, it's everywhere. I mean, it's getting bigger and bigger I read a statistic the other day that says that we're reaching heights where it's gonna be, they're gonna make more money than drug traffickers. So, and that's, the biggest, well, these things.
Well, I think one important thing to remember when we're talking about human trafficking, and many of you may already know this, is that you can sell a human body over and over again. And whereas drugs, once you sell them, they're gone. You don't profit off of it anymore. And that's why these criminals these criminal enterprises are growing like crazy. They're catching on to this, or they've already caught on to it. But going back, just to clarify one thing regarding the difference between human smuggling and human trafficking, human trafficking does not require transporting across borders. So what Jerry said is not necessarily incorrect, but it's broader than that. I know the term trafficking might invoke, an image of having to move someone, and so in that sense, I kind of don't like that word. But there's no requirement of movement. As long if you have someone, if you're transporting, that also constitutes human trafficking as well. But I just wanted to clarify that. Regarding
Were trafficked in their own homes.
right. In terms of the magnitude of the issue in Arizona, I know that in Phoenix there's a lot more awareness and a lot more, I think there's more,
They're more proactive.
they're more proactive up there. There's a lot more data that Phoenix has than Tucson. I think the answer, to answer it accurately, is to say we don't know necessarily what the extent is here, because there just needs to be more awareness, more data to be collected. But we do know it's happening here for sure.
Okay, let me tell you this. Now, I went to, Cindy McCain was going to have a task force. It got kind of confused with Sharon Brewer and everything. But I went to a breakfast with Cindy McCain. And there were a bunch of people there that were going to be working on this issue of trafficking. Polaris Project was there. Sharon Hope was there. Sharon Hope does, you can look online and you can see how Arizona ranks as far as trafficking laws and bills. And Phoenix was known as Phoenix is known as one of the best, or a model place where their law enforcement and courts work on trafficking, if I said that correctly. But we are not, because we, Phoenix got the money. They got a bunch of money, but let me tell you this. Now, I also volunteered we did a thing here called Project Raise, where I was working with the councilman of Ward 6, Steve Kosacek. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but we made history in Tucson on March 8th. Instead of the police taking the people they arrested to jail, they actually brought them to a church, and we got to offer them services. So it was awesome, because they didn't have to go to jail, and they could sign up for services, and we might have saved 6 women's lives, I think. Actually, we had 6 women and 2 men, interestingly enough. Anyway, because of that, I offered to do, I was a guest speaker at the program that we have, which is called the Dove Program, and that's the alternative, the sentencing alternative they have, the people who are charged with prostitution. They can go to this Dove Program, or I guess they go to jail. I don't know how that works. But anyway, here, when I went to do that group, there was, I think, 7 women in that group, and 6 of those women were from Phoenix. So I'm telling you, Phoenix is also known as the 3rd in the nation, the highest rate of having sex trafficking. Or how do I say that correctly?
Yeah, yes, Phoenix is actually known to be kind of one of the stops on like this route across circuit, there we go, on the west coast. Portland, Seattle, Phoenix is actually one of them as well. And so Phoenix is very well known to have an issue with this. I want to kind of touch on what Beth said about a lot of people coming down from Phoenix. As a prosecutor handling these cases, I also see that and this is just my hunch. I don't know for sure, but what I'm gathering is happening is Phoenix is a vice unit, and they have law enforcement dedicated specifically to these types of cases. Tucson doesn't.
Right.
And I feel like word is getting around in Phoenix that if there's a higher chance of you getting caught, let's go down to Tucson. just based on my experience. I could be wrong, but I am seeing when these girls are being interviewed by police that they say we came from Phoenix, or when we do investigations, we see that they're posting Backpage ads in Phoenix as well, most predominantly in Phoenix, and then they say, hey, their ad will say like, hey, we're down in Tucson from July 4th through 8th, hit us up. So that's what I think is happening, and I think that we're probably going to see a lot more of these cases.
Which means the traffickers and the pimps are coming here, which
Right.
means we have to be way more careful with our young people. And we need to, we need to get awareness out there and educate them and tell them that this is, this is something we can't hide from them. We have to say this is happening. So you need to be aware, because this is really happening.
Let me jump in real quick. In my piece. I got to follow on with Deborah. I have to have a disclaimer too. I'm probably going to say something my agency would support. So just take that as it is. I don't like statistics. When I was at headquarters, one of the things, we used to fight with the U.S. State Department. The State Department puts out a trafficking persons report every year. And they put all kinds of, they used to put all kinds of statistics in it. 600,000 people trafficked around the world, 100,000 people trafficked across borders. So one of the things that I was constantly asked was, well, where'd they get the number? Can we backstop this? Well, we start digging into it a little bit, and long story short, and a lot of the statistics that were being used by the State Department came from some guy over at the CIA. I didn't know what he was doing, as near as anybody could tell. But he kind of cooked this number up. And there's just no good empirical data. But I took the position, and we went back to the State Department and said, why are we trying to scope it like this? Is it only bad because it's the second largest criminal enterprise in the world? Is it okay to sell little girls for sex, or to hold people in bondage in a house or in a restaurant? Any one of those instances deserves a response, a whole government response. So I think that's how you have to look at it. And from the law enforcement perspective, places where we apply more resources to it, where we look for it, when we dig a little bit beneath the surface, we find more and more of it. If you don't want to see it, you're not going to see it. If you look for it, you're going to find it. And I don't really think it matters how big it is. I think it still needs to be addressed.
That's probably the first question I would ask. How big is the problem in Tucson? Well, I did educate for years now, Barry. We don't know. That's my answer. We don't know. But there are a couple reasons why we don't know, besides the whole stats issue anyway. Part of it's labeling. There's no sex trafficking, human trafficking label on a booking sheet. When you go to arrest people, it's not even on there. It's a term we weren't even using. When I started 3 years ago, I met with the mayor, the chief of police, FBI, ICE, county attorney. They all said the same thing. We've never had a sex trafficking case in the history of Tucson. I'm like, really? And that's what they said. Well, technically that was true. But I knew of 5 or 6 cases myself with my own daughter, which I presented. But in each case, it was never labeled trafficking. My daughter there was no crime whatsoever. They didn't arrest anyone. And that's not infrequent. They're runaway girls, juveniles returned to the custody of their parents. That was the only report from my daughter. Several that have happened in the last 2 years, I've been here the same thing. A girl in a youth home was taken to a party by her adult boyfriend, whose friends paid him money to rape her all night, 8 guys. And there were no arrested now. That's not a sex trafficking crime. The recent ones weren't labeled as sex trafficking crimes. So we've had a whole process of, we are arresting girls for prostitution. We know that. It's about 6 to 10 a year, statistically here. I mean, you can't be a prostitute when you're a minor. It's impossible. One. Number 2, you can't consent. Let me give you a couple of things to give you an idea, though, of the extent of the problem. Talking to the law enforcement officers who do internet crimes against children, as I've checked, that's their job, is to catch guys on the internet trying to buy girls, minors, for sex. I've talked to them here in Tucson, I've talked to them in Phoenix. My question is, well, how hard is it for you to get a guy willing to pay money to have sex with a minor? They said, drug quote, it's shooting fish in a barrel. I said, well, how many of these guys can you catch? As many as we have hours in a day. That's their literal answer. It's just a matter of time. We don't have enough time in a day. we can catch as many of these guys as we want. I have talked to 19-year-olds, about 500 clients in her cell phone. She had 500 when she was 18. I've talked to girls who are on the internet every day, 13, 14, 15, 16 years of age, with clients. Now, those aren't statistics. They're examples. If you talk to the girls and the women involved in prostitution in Tucson, and you say it's not a big problem, they will laugh in your face. They say, oh my gosh, you don't get it. There are as many jobs as we want. And I've met dozens of women in Tucson. And they all, including minors, have no problem getting as many men as they want. So we don't know the extent, but we do know that it's widespread to some extent.
So I've heard you all mention a couple of things. One was back pages, and then online solicitation and things like that. I'm wondering how can we be more aware? How would we recognize a victim or an exploitation?
You're gonna see different things. You're gonna see her, I'm thinking of a young girl here, she's gonna act different. She's gonna maybe become more isolated. I mean, are you asking about signs?
Yes.
She'll have new clothes, maybe money, all of a sudden, and maybe she might have boyfriends that are older. You know, her behavior will change a little bit. She's gonna stay away from her friends more because she's not gonna want them to know. You know, things like that.
I think it's also wise to think about not necessarily what would a victim look like, but what types of red flags or indicators can you expect to see a perpetrator engaging in the process of grooming a girl. And this is, you know, in the context of sex trafficking. And I'm sure Eric can give you a lot of red flags to look out for. But I think that it's important to walk away from here tonight recognizing that there isn't a cookie cutter version of what a victim of sex trafficking will look like. And don't ever for a moment think that your sister or your daughter or your neighbor is immune from this. You know, just based on my experience on the criminal side and viewing these cases, really, some parents come to me and they're just absolutely shocked, like, how could my daughter, she's 12 years old, and this is, it might be the Facebook case that Jerry had mentioned earlier, but you know, I mean, especially with the internet, it's so easy for people who are looking for minors to connect and engage with them. Before the internet, I mean, it was so much harder. You would have to, you know, kind of hang out at schools and kind of, you know, have a reason for being there. And the internet, you just post a picture of a 18-year-old boy as your profile pic, and you pretend to be him, and you know, shower all sorts of compliments. You know, and young kids today, they accept friend requests from everybody. I mean, it's just so easy. And so don't ever for a moment think that, well, just because your daughter or your sister or your neighbor doesn't have any issues or has never run away before, that this could never happen to her. I mean, having said that, though, definitely girls who are in vulnerable positions are definitely at a high risk. And those are the types of girls that a lot of these traffickers are looking for. I had a case where the girl ran away from home. She wasn't getting along with her father. Her mother was out of the picture. She ran away. She was in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant, and a guy in a nice car pulled up and said, "Hey, do you need any help?" And you know, Eric said this, and this is exactly what she said, which is identical to what Eric was saying, is these girls, and I think Jerry as well, the first thought that crossed her mind is, how am I going to eat tonight? And where am I going to sleep? And this guy just rolls up as she's thinking that and offers her some food and a place to sleep. And she was she was not even close to even considering doing any of this stuff, but she agreed to go with him. And so, Eric, do you want to talk about some of the red flags or indicators?
Yeah, well, I think you touched on some of them. I mean, you're going to see romantic relationships that are inappropriate, wildly inappropriate in some cases, you know, with young teenage girls who, you know, whose boyfriend is 23, 28, 36, or their fiance. They change the way they dress. You know, I hate to be stereotypical, but, you know, they start dressing more provocatively. Why are they dressing more provocatively? Because they're being sexualized somehow. they become isolated. They don't hang out with their friends that they used to hang out with anymore. You know, they're resistant at home, or that relationship at home changes. They run away. You know, they start committing what are referred to as status offenses within the juvenile system. You know, curfew violations, alcohol violations, tobacco violations. And they start having police contacts. Not generally a good thing, because those police contacts generally make them not want to have any more. Makes it harder for us. So you see this change in behavior that they undergo, and there's usually something on the outside that's coming in. You might not see it, but it's that, you know, they're disappearing after school, not going home. Where are they at? Where are they going? Where are they going on the weekends? Yeah, those are some of the things. I mean, some of the more hardcore stuff you might see with the girls that are in there in the game, in the lifestyle. You know, they're going to be branded probably. They're going to have tattoos put on them. They're going to, if they're moved, particularly if they're moved to another city to work, they're not going to have identification documents. But a lot of this is not stuff you guys are going to see. What it's going to be, it's going to be the first responder, the law enforcement officer, the EMT who has to show up, the nurse at the emergency room. You know, when the girl comes in because, you know, she's got some medical issues as a result of working. That has to be addressed. She's not going to have any on it. There's going to be somebody talking for her. You know, it could be in a labor trafficking situation. It's very similar. You're going to have people who don't have their identification. I guarantee everybody in this room got a driver's license, ID card, something on you right now. You got a wallet, you got a credit card or a debit card, some cash money. These folks don't have that. You know, if they don't speak the language, somebody else is translating for all of them. How many people live in the apartment? How many people normally live in an apartment? 2 or 3, maybe. How about 10 unrelated people? Probably not. Red flag. Where do you work? Who do you work for? How much do you get paid? How do you get paid? How much did you pay to get here? Your immigration statement. Big questions like that. Not something you're going to probably interact with or see, but those are some of the indicators, you know, the more generalized indicators, you can say, from a law enforcement perspective.
And I have to say this, they groom you, they take your ID, they take anything that identifies you, they took all my stuff, and they tell me, never, ever, ever tell anybody that you're 16. You tell them you're 21, here's your birthday. He made me recite that over and over and over, because if he said, if they know you're 16, they're gonna take you and they'll never let you go. They're gonna keep you and find your mama, and if your mama doesn't want you right now, she won't come get you. I mean, he had me so afraid that I would be sucked in by the system, and I knew people who were sucked in by the system. So my name was Julie. He gave me a new name. They just take away who you are. I had a new name, a new age, and that's who I was. Once I got arrested as Julie, 21, that's who I was. The next year I was Julie and I was 22. I could get arrested a million times and they thought I was Julie. Because the first time you get arrested and you give them a name, that's who you are in that system, forever. I'm still Julie, I don't know how No. But I want you to be aware that I know we talk about this number 18. This is like, I even wrote a little paper about it, the magic number 18. When I turned 18, I didn't get a birthday card. Trust me, I didn't get a birthday card. I got, have a nice day, baby, make a couple $100 extra. You know, that's what I got. I didn't get anybody that mailed me a bunch of information that said, hey Beth, you're 18, you have choices. You know, you can get a job, you can get ID, I didn't know any of that. I didn't know about any of that because he didn't want me to. I was his meal ticket, you have to remember that. That's why, you know, people wonder why girls don't leave. Because they don't want us to leave. So they spend their whole breathing moments making sure you don't leave. Because if you leave, they have to get a job or something, you know? While you're there, they don't have to. So I just don't want people to think that only those under 18 are eligible for services, you know, because you're going to meet, I hope to get into the jails, and I think I'm almost into the jails. I know I'm going to meet girls who are 16 who are fingerprinted as 18, because I did it. I was in jail, I did it, and I know it's still happening. People do that. Rachel Lloyd, when I watched, you know, the video somebody made, Kim was on there, Melissa, I'm in survivor groups with all these women. That's nothing, it's kind of neat. We have these secret groups online where we empower each other, which is great. But anyway, I just want you to know that, yeah, don't tell people, don't say just because they're 18 they made a choice. Because I didn't get any mail that said I had choices. I didn't know I had choices until I actually walked out the door. You know, when I was finally able to leave, I got to leave because there was a trick out there that was acting crazy. He cut this woman, and it was girls that I worked with. He cut her on the side of her breast and had sex with her in the cut, just nasty. And he smashed this other girl's head with a cement brick where the police, I went to jail, because you go to jail a lot. I went to jail over 200 times. So I'm in jail, and they brought her clothes in and said, okay, who was this? You know, out to all the prostituted women. They wanted so we could identify the clothes from the night before. Crazy. Anyway, because of that, I got to leave, because, you know, my pimp didn't want me dead, because then he got to get the job. Anyway, so he sent me to Minnesota. That's how I was able to escape, you know, the distance. He couldn't really control me that well because I wasn't there anymore. But anyway, just magic number 18, no. Don't get sucked into that, please.
So I'm curious about,
I don't, you know, there's a tension here.
yes.
There's a tension between, it could be anyone, right? But there are indicators. So we have to tell you, whoa. You know, my daughter's case is unusual in a sense. But if you don't know the indicator, you will miss some very obvious things that you don't want to miss. So the things that were mentioned here, I know ICE produces a card with indicators. We have a card with indicators. One girl that I'll give you an example was 3 months ago, the Tucson Gym and Mineral Show, which by the way is nationally known as a magnet for prostitution and trafficking. People in Tucson don't know it, but it's written up in national books. Because we have 1 million people coming in, and when people gather like the Super Bowl, they bring in prostitutes and girls. She was 17, picked up in a hotel during an FBI bus. Because all law enforcement know about this, they're out there. That's an indicator. You got a 17-year-old in a hotel room by herself. Adult female prostitutes in the next room. No name except passion, no ID, no money, no clothes except what she had in her bag, no address, and she had a guy's name tattooed across her neck. Tragedy of that was she was never identified as a trafficking victim. She was dropped off at a group youth home in Tucson where she went away. One reason I know about it, my daughter was running the group youth home for girls when she was dropped off there, and knew immediately who it was, and I got hold of Eric and his wife, and we tried to get some help there, but we'll never split before we could. I do work with doctors. I talk to med students who go to med school, UMC, because 30% of trafficking victims now visit a healthcare professional while they're being trafficked, and they're not identified. So we do need to get the indicators out there. What do you look for? What do you see? What questions do you ask? Because you might come across something. We've gotten tips from parents, from juvenile detention officers, from hotel people who have a girl come in with an older guy. So you do need to learn some of those tips, but don't think that they're all going to fit those categories because they don't.
So when law enforcement picks up a victim that's been trafficked, what happens? Do they go through a lot of the same things that Beth went through, or have we evolved and where, you know, they're not jailed multiple times over prostitution?
They're jailed still. It's still the same. I'm sorry. Because we see it as prostitution. I mean, you'll even read things that say prostituted child. What is that? Like you said, there's no prostituted child. You can't consent, so how could you be a prostitute? You know, I don't know. Prostitution implies choice, I think. So this word sex trafficking came up, and it kind of changed the scope of things. More people paid attention. But prostitution equals sex trafficking, and sex trafficking equals prostitution. That's my, should I say a disclaimer?
I think that we definitely have room for improvement, but I also think that we are on the right track. Earlier I mentioned that I'm part of a human trafficking working group, and there are actually some representatives from that group in the back row over there. That constitutes different prosecuting agencies, the U.S. Attorney's Office, our office, the Sheriff's Department, FBI, ICE, TPD, and so we're really trying to figure out, and it's kind of a learn-as-you-go process, trying to figure out, you know, where can we put these girls? What do they need? How can we speak to them so that, you know, they trust us and are able to give us their accounts so that we can prosecute them and hold these perpetrators accountable? Because the bottom line is, if these pimps and these traffickers get the sense that they can get away with it here in Tucson, they're going to keep coming and they're not going to stop. And so accountability, I think, is huge.
What are some barriers that you have to prosecuting the traffickers?
I think there are a lot. One thing is that, well, does anyone, I don't want to hog the...
Well, I got one more quick, just a
Yeah.
quick thought. The biggest challenge, quite simply, in working trafficking, whether it's from an investigative standpoint, from prosecutions or victim services, is victim identification. It's having that, it's either the community members or those first responders recognizing that this might be a trafficking victim, as opposed to, it's a junkie, I arrest them because they're holding, you know, a gram of meth. This is a prostitute, this is a shoplifter, this is a runaway, this is a status violator. These folks don't raise their hands and say, hi, I'm a trafficking victim. Hey, I've been victimized, save me. Because they don't see themselves as a victim. And quite honestly, they see themselves, you know, they see themselves as a whore. They see themselves as a drug addict. They see themselves as a bad person, criminal. And it's very, very difficult to get that initial sort of triage to say, hey, we got a victim or potential victim. And then the question, what do you do with them? You got one. How do we refer it? How do we get the follow-up? Because the patrol officer on the street, he's not doing the follow-up. He doesn't know what questions to say. That's not his role. Do we have an infrastructure in place to refer those potential victims to ensure that they're getting the right type of investigative follow-up and that they're getting the right types of victim services? Because that's really what's going to provide that stability to help get out of that situation. So I just want to say, victim identification really is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge.
There are bad stories and good stories, right? We miss victims entirely. We label them as problems, criminals, and that's bad. When did I recognize my daughter as a trafficking victim? 15 years later. So, do I blame first responders who don't recognize victims? Good grief, they've got 15 minutes. They didn't have 15 years to figure out what happened here, and that this what happened to her. There's a whole, it's kind of like domestic violence 30 years ago. It went on, it was rampant, but we didn't talk about it, we didn't make arrests, we weren't prosecuting, and we're going to jail. It's undercover. So this recognition is a huge problem. But what's happened here in Tucson and Phoenix is way ahead of us. I started going up there and I got sick and tired of hearing how great Phoenix was. And we didn't do anything in Tucson. But we do have law enforcement officers. We've trained, I know about 250 to recognize, to respond. We didn't have training before. And I say almost every agency now is providing its own training, including Junior League of Tucson. The trafficking working group works current crimes. Last year was our very first arrest and conviction of a pimp of a minor. And it happened because of that group, and she was the prosecutor. We got the successful plea guilty. She did not get the sentence she wanted. We got to sit on 2 judges. 1 year for trafficking a 16-year-old is outrageous. So we have some things to learn. The officers who found the victim in this case did an incredible job, because she did the same thing. I'm 20, I'm out here on my own, you know, forget it. Instead of acting tough cop interrogation, which never works, these guys instead, they use the soft approach, and pretty soon she admits, no, I'm really put out here, I'm only 16, and I've never done this before, and oh, here's my cell phone with her pimp and everybody in it. So those officers saved this girl's life, literally. The prosecutors are saving people now. So things are changing. We have thousands of law law enforcement people, it's going to take time. But you're a part of that, that's why I'm here. We are getting referrals and phone calls from parents, teachers, citizens, because they're now looking. So you're critical too.
It's very critical. I mean, they're young. Here they're in this other life, they stripped them from everything they have, and now they're caught up by the police. They're scared. Because these people, they told me they'd kill me or kill my family, or, you know what I mean? So I was afraid to tell them. I mean, I got caught up in Minneapolis with a couple. They actually had to release us all because, I don't know, it was this young girl, we didn't even know. She was underage, and she said she had lived with us, and I was only with that pimp for a year at that time, but I was scared. I would have never told on her because I thought he'd kill my whole family. Would you believe that? So I think that's one of the huge problems. You know, even no matter how nice you come at me, I don't want them to kill my mother, you know? Anyway.
So, I have a few more questions, but I want to open it up to the audience first because I know there's a lot of people in the community that probably have some questions for you. And so we'll do that now.
Deborah, you're probably getting ready to mention this, but it's still a law in Arizona that makes it easy for someone to get, or hard to prosecute someone if they claim they didn't know the girl was not 18. Correct? Or is it the 15-year-old law? What's that?
No, ignorance of age is not a defense in Arizona, at least on the state level.
Uh-huh.
On the federal, I'm not an expert on federal law. I think my understanding is that you had to have a reasonable opportunity to observe. So basically, you know, if you see the girl in high school or have some type of observation to let you know, give you a hint that she's a minor, then that's sufficient. But for child prostitution, you don't need to know that the child was a minor. In the case that Jerry just referred to, that's what the defense was, that I didn't know she was 16, but that's not a defense.
Good.
I have a question. I wanted to know, based on, it's not really clear what happened when a girl is found to be trafficked. Like, you guys haven't said exactly, like, if I had a daughter or if I were trafficked and I came in contact with police and I was identified, what is the process to get me off the streets and get me home and safe? And what if my home isn't safe? What do you guys do? How do you help that girl?
There's some people in the back row that can probably answer better. Because if it's a minor, it goes to juvenile court. There's some juvenile court people back there. And this is a process that too is in flux. Because they're treating their people down there too. How do we, in some cases they've committed crimes. They really have. And so there's a criminal element to it. The recent one I was involved in, she had committed crime, resisting arrest. She got arrested because she was dropped off in a taxi at a hotel. And in resisting arrest, that's a felony. So she's being tried for a felony as a 16-year-old. But no one, literally no one in that courtroom, including the judge or the prosecuting attorney, wanted to convict her of a felony. I know that because I talked to the prosecutor afterwards. But that was a crime. So when it was shared in the courtroom, well, wait a minute, she was molested 11, raped at 15, raped at 16, being sold. They all said, whoa, this is not a criminal. This is a victim. We're going to get her help. And the prosecuting attorney, who was doing her job, was perfectly fine with that. The truth is, everyone in that courtroom had the girl's best interests at heart. There's not some hardcore system of people who don't care. That's just not true. They really want to get help. The problem is, we have no government programs whatsoever for victims of sex trafficking. None. Even in Tucson, we're barely, I mean, therapy, in treatment. We have the same girls in Phoenix, there's in treatment centers up there, and there's some out of state. So they're kind of stuck with, if they've been sex trafficked, where do we get the specific inpatient therapy that they need? We have a real problem with that. lack of resources.
So there are also some statutory requirements that, like, assuming that they don't go to detention, juvenile detention, if we're talking about juvenile, they're probably going to go to Child Protective Services. If they're runaway and they go home, unfortunately, home might be the problem. There are residential treatment facilities. What law enforcement is going to try to do if we've got an identified victim or potential victim, we're going to try to get them placement. That poses challenges in and of itself, because maybe CPS has custody. Now we're working with CPS to get them someplace else. Maybe we got to go to mom or dad and say, hey, we've got a place to put your child that's going to help them. And mom or dad says, nah, I'm not going to sign them in. They go back to mom and dad and they run away 2 days later. That very thing happened. Some of it is literally just the sort of statutory framework of how juveniles are dealt with in the state of Arizona. Other states do deal with it differently. Back on the East Coast, where I worked previously, there are some state programs. The state essentially comes in and takes custody. A child needs a CHIN system or a PIN system. A child needs supervision. The state asserts control and says, no, the state's placing you here because everything else in your life is bad. But at the same time, even if you put them in a residential facility, they're not locked in there. They're going to run. I mean, that's the reality. They're going to run. They're going to get encountered again. You don't solve it overnight. I mean, they don't make their disclosures overnight.
No.
It's a long process. That's just the way it's the reality of life.
And I think we need some non-governmental organizations actually that help victims. I would love to have a safe home or a place for people to be able to come, because just like AA, victims need victims. I'm sorry, but they do. They need to see that they can move beyond this. I mean, this is a rough thing. Our sexuality is part of our soul, and somebody has taken that and we've sold it and we've changed it. And now we have to learn how to put it back. And when you're out there, it's like the government, it's a us and them kind of thing. And getting out, I know for a while they were talking about a program to help victims when they got out, but they wanted to lock them up. I mean, really, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's like, I think it would work better if it was something that wasn't run by the government.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Because it seems like the panel has focused a lot on underage victims, but the thing is that those underage victims become adults and they continue to be prostitutes. And what kind of services are available for adult women who are in prostitution?
There is none right now. That's what I'm trying to do. There are no services. We have a diversion program called the DUF program, and I don't want to be mean, but I don't see how the curriculum helps them deal with the issue of prostitution, because it doesn't even say the word prostitution. So that's what Willow Way's trying to do. We're trying to provide a place for the victims to be able to go talk about it. That's the first step. That's what helped me. I needed a safe place to talk about what happened to me. I was raped every day, You want to talk about that, and you don't want to talk about that in a room full of people who are going to judge you and tell you it was your own fault, or hazards of the occupation, or, you need a starting point. And I think the self-help, their educational/support groups, they've worked. I've done them for 13 years, and I think that's what people need. They need to find a place where they feel accepted again, where they feel they're worthy, of other people. And that's what we have to do. And here, there's nothing. There's nothing. I was amazed there was something here.
Can I just touch on that as well? My job as a prosecutor is to see that justice is done for the crimes that are committed. And unfortunately, a lot of times, because of those boundaries of my job description, I'm not really able to engage in that rehabilitation aspect, even though I feel like in these cases it's really necessary. And I'll give you an example just real quickly. You're absolutely correct that when these minors grow up, and they become adults and they still prostitute, a lot of times they end up becoming what are bottoms. Are you familiar with the term bottoms? They're basically the pimp's #1 girl. Sometimes she's literally the girlfriend to the pimp, but. But she kind of manages the stable. She manages all the girls. And so you know, it's not unusual to see a girl who was trafficked, a victim when she was young, and then kind of she grows up with it, and then she becomes basically the pimp's right-hand girl. And she's the one that's enforcing the rules and, you know, kind of, you know, making sure that the girls stay in line. As a prosecutor personally, when I suspect that that might be happening with a girl that's charged with child prostitution, a woman, I'll go to the defense attorney and I'll say, hey, do you have any evidence for me to consider that your client was once a victim? If she were, then I'll take that into consideration in determining what I think is a just outcome in your client's case, not the pimp's, but yours. So that's personally what I do as a prosecutor, but unfortunately, you know, there's a lack of services here in Tucson. Hopefully, you know, we're working on that. And yeah, it's an imperfect system, but we're working on it.
And they're called the bottom feeders. I'll say the word. She was just trying to be polite.
You mentioned that question, so that's a great question, and I know our answer is we don't have programs here, and some of you are groaning at that. It's like, boy, that's terrible. I wish you'd turn that around and say, that's an opportunity. 3 years ago, we had no task force, we had no convictions, we had no awareness programs. I'm the kind of person that sees, wait a minute, we don't have programs for prostituted women. Okay, who in this room is going to do something about that? That's my question. Every woman I've talked to in Tucson who was involved in prostitution started as a teenager. I'm not saying that's true of all, but all of them I've met. They got into it, and then couldn't get out of it. It's a huge need here for help with these women.
Average entry age is 13. So we're not talking about career choices. I believe it's 12 now because of the internet. But globally, average entry age is 8. Isn't that crazy?
Hey Beth, could you say a little bit more about the Project Rose and what exactly happens with the, it serves girls and women, right, who are arrested?
Actually, no. Not here. I'm not sure about Project Rose. Project Phoenix, Project Raise, the one we have here.
Yeah, that.
We couldn't take juveniles. I don't know if it was because it was our first one or why, but they wouldn't take, if they were underage, they took them somewhere else. We
They
couldn't.
took them to CPS, that's what they took them. Or they took them to jail.
Well, you know, I have a meeting this Friday about that, and I'm going to ask them that question because, yeah, that's not good. Then I don't see why we couldn't have taken them because we needed. It was just amazing. I wish you guys could have seen it. I mean, the people were stunned that they weren't going to jail. They were like, "You mean I'm not going to jail?" I mean, they didn't mind being there. In fact, because a survivor brings them through. We had a judge there. We had a prosecutor there. We had who else? We had Kodak was there. We had housing. We had the diversion program, and then we had all kinds of resources. We had clothing. We had hygiene kits. We fed them. It was awesome. I mean,
So
it was wonderful.
what happened with them after that?
That night, the gang strike force unit are the ones that actually went out and got the girls. Why? I don't know. But they brought them in, and they were having technical difficulties with because they were supposed to try to, you know, there were certain requirements. They weren't eligible if they were arrested 20 times. So they tried to run the names on the street, and for some reason it wasn't working. So we only got like 12 people altogether. And out of those 12 people, 8 of them were eligible. And out of the 8, 6 chose to go into the program. And the other 2 had to go on court dates. For some reason, the judge gave those 2 particular people different court dates. I don't really know what happened to them. So, I mean, it was good. They took the services. I mean, the majority of the people that came in that could take the services, in fact, none of them said no. All of them said yes.
So how did the tendency to run away from the safe house or services, whatever,
How,
play into that?
I'm sorry, can you
Did
repeat?
they stick with the services, or were they afraid and then they go back to their?
No, they have to do the services. If they don't do the services, it's just like any other diversion. They'll go to jail. You know, they have 6 months, no same or similar. It's just like, it's almost like they went to court that night because the judge was there. He was the coolest guy too. Anyway, I really liked him, Judge Coleman. Anyway, he He was very kind to them. He gave them, it was almost like they gave him a gift, and they told him that. And I told him that. I was like, you know, you're lucky. Because, you know, if this was me, I'd have went to jail. You're getting an opportunity here. If you want to do this program, you know, if you need something, I mean, there's a reason they're out there. Trust me, they don't want to be out there. 98% of the people would get out of, no, these are people I've worked with. Well, that's where I'm getting my statistics. Well, you know, they wouldn't be out there if they didn't have to be out there. Some of them don't have housing, some of them don't have jobs, some of them, you know, there's all these issues. And if you can meet, there was a young girl that I was walking through, and it's like, she was like, I don't want to do this, but I have nowhere to stay. So if I can arrange housing for you, you don't need to do this, right? She was like, I would love that. You know, and she was happy that she actually got picked up that night. So, I mean, those were the kind of things we were hearing. Oh, thank you for arresting me. I mean, it was something.
So, and that's an ongoing program in Tucson.
Yes, we're gonna keep doing it. I don't know when. There was, you know, the first night we had it, somebody, you know, there's always people. We had SWAP, actually, a woman we both know, came there with a bunch of people to protest it. They said that we were having the police arrest people unnecessarily. But you know what? The police do this anyway. We didn't make them do it. I mean, they have to. The community says, get these people off the street. You know, there's used condoms in my yard, which is an issue. You know, I think we need to go after the Johns. I think we need to go after. But not just, you know, because the woman goes to jail, but the man, he doesn't go to jail. He just gets out. Don't do it here. You know, like I told you, I'd say later, I got hired by the state. They fired me because 30 years ago, I have a trafficking charge. I was 17 for one of them. I have 9 charges, actually. It's from 1980 to 1982. And because of that, I'm this horrible red person. Even though I've done all these good things, I have done 20 times the amount of good things, and it doesn't matter. They still wouldn't let me work. So I had to file through the Arizona Board of Fingerprints. They gave me a clearance card. They said, you know what, I told them everything that I've done, all the good stuff. They did give it to me, and then I called the state and said, okay, you told me if I got it off my record, you'd hire me back. I said, how can I get my job back? They said, well, you didn't disclose that. So we're not going to rehire you. You know, they told me this is going to stay on your record in Arizona for 99 years. So as you think about that, we're telling these people they need to rehabilitate themselves, but we're not letting them do that. I mean, I worked 15 years in an agency for women and girls getting out of prostitution. I come to Arizona, and they don't want me to have a job here. I've had to work for cheap here. It's terrible. It really is. We need just second chance laws here. I mean, I'm still interviewing everywhere. It's like, anybody has a job. I'm hoping to get a grant to be able to start well away because this needs to be done, and then I will be working on second chance laws if I have the opportunity. Because we need that. Minnesota just did that. They have a bill right now for second chance laws. However, they tried to do it a couple years ago and it didn't pass, so we'll see what happens. But we need that. I mean, 99 years, come on now. I'm hoping I don't have to work when I'm 99.
So I had a question. I don't have a microphone. Can you explain how when you first got picked up, because I have a vision of almost kidnapping, but can you explain, you know, how the process works? Do you go home and you just don't tell your parents? I'm a little confused. When you first were taken, you know, to the party, you woke up.
Oh, I didn't get to go home. He told me the party was in Chicago. Okay, I'm from Minnesota, I'm 16. I really wasn't paying attention in geography. You know, I was like, oh, how far is that? He was like, oh, 2 hours. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, cool, I'll go. So I went willingly. I got in his car and he had this little McDonald's cup and he was like, well, you want a drink? 16, you give me a drink? Sure. You know, I took it, I drank it, and the next thing I remember is he was waking me up and it was dark out and we were there and I was like, well, where are we? And we were somewhere, we weren't even in Chicago yet. It's like, it's been way more than 2 hours, you know. But right away he said, babe, you know what I am? And that's when he told me he was a pimp and I had to sleep with this guy in this truck and I couldn't believe that happened and it was kidnapping. I mean, they kidnapped me and raped me and beat me. And then, what could I do? I couldn't get out. He had a gun. He said he'd kill me. I mean, he just got done beating me. I thought he would kill me. And they brought me to Chicago, and they kept me there. And I wasn't the only one there, because you could hear other girls. They kept Penny, you're right, there was no chains, but they took my clothes. I was butt naked. Okay, I wasn't gonna run. Where was I gonna go? I didn't know anybody in Chicago. I had no clothes. You know, I couldn't see. They took my glasses. I mean, they took everything, my ID. I didn't think my mother wanted me. I tried to go home once, and they got me. And it's like, it was a whole big long thing because the pimps were at the bus station. So the police, you know, I told the police, please help me. So they were supposed to help me get home. They put me at the train station to wait for the bus. I went back. They came back, picked me up because there were so many pimps at the bus station. They put me on the bus, so I hop on the bus. I'm almost to Minnesota. I had to use the bathroom. And I couldn't wait anymore, so I got off the stop before Minnesota, and the pimp was there. Beat me up. I came out of the bathroom to get back on the bus, and no, I didn't get back on the bus. He took me back, told me my mom sold me.
So from 16 to 22,
That was
you
it.
were.
That was it. I didn't smoke.
One in the back and then up front.
I'd just like to say this has been incredibly informative and impressionable on me, and I'm sure most of the women in here too. So I just thank you for your time, and especially Beth sharing your experiences. My question is really about the offenders. You talked about indicators and things to look for with the victims, and maybe this question is mostly geared for Eric. Do you start to see commonalities between the offenders, the pimps, especially the ones at the top? Why do they choose sex trafficking as opposed to another lead crime, I guess?
Right. It's funny, you never hit it right, nail on the head. You sell them, in terms of sex trafficking, or even labor trafficking, you're making money from them over and over and over and over again. You know, it's the criminal activity that keeps on giving every single day. Better make your quota. You know, if I smuggle an alien, I'm getting maybe $3,500 to smuggle that alien. I let the alien, that's I'm done. I got my $3,500 bucks, now I gotta go find more. That's a lot of work. I could have recruitment, infrastructure in Mexico or Guatemala. No, I got a girl, or I've got workers. They can't leave. They make me money hand over fist, and that's why you do it. That's why people engage this kind of behavior. Most criminal activity. I think you almost want to ask, what do they look like? You know. I'm gonna get in trouble if I say that. But pimps, what do they look like? I mean, there's a stereotype of this, it's the guy rolling around and he's got 22s and he's got a lot of gold on, he's flashing a lot of money, lives in a shithole, lives in a those guys exist. There's also women involved in it who might look like you.
Yeah, person sitting next
Out
to
of
me.
a house, working out of a house in suburbia. You're running the girls. You're the guy that owns the Chinese buffet. And he's holding their net over their head. It's not part of that contractual agreement. Mexican restaurant, I don't care. Pick one. But anything with any place you got a lot of immigrant labor, where there's terms and conditions of suddenly change, there's maybe a debt bomb situation going on. And they live in an apartment in the same complex that you're in. And you see them coming and going, but you never think anything of it because they work at the restaurant. And it must be okay.
Specific to sex trafficking, I would encourage you guys to do a YouTube search of just like pimping or rules of pimping or just, I mean, it's amazing. There's it's this whole culture with all these rules, and you really get to see, these pimps are very proud of what they do. This is a hidden crime, but in the same sense, they love to talk about just how they have all these girls and all this money and how they control them. So it's really fascinating if you want to go home tonight and educate yourself a little bit more. There's this one thing I want to share. There's this thing called the pimp circle. Have you heard about a pimp circle? There's this rule in pimp land where if you are a girl that belongs to a pimp, you can't ever look at another pimp in their eyes. And if you do, it's the ultimate betrayal, and now you belong to that other pimp. And so there are all these street rules, and
They put them under pimp's arrest, what happens. And pimp's arrest, they take all your money, all your jewelry, you have to pay a fine. Your pimp has to pay him a fine, and then you get your behind.
Yeah, it's your property, basically, your property. And the pimp circle, I saw a video of this, I don't know if this is on YouTube or not, but a girl gets in a fight with her pimp, and then all of these pimps just come, and they're on the street, they come and surround this girl trying to get her to look at them, and just like berating her, and just not so much physically, but just getting up in her face. And you can see she's trying not to look up because she knows she'll be in a really big trouble. And the purpose of why this video was being shown at this training that I was at is because an average law enforcement officer, if they saw that, they would probably just think it's, just disorderly conduct or just some drunk guys, harassing a girl. But actually, what's going on is a criminal act beyond just disorderly conduct. I mean, they're engaging in pimp culture right there. So, I mean, there's so much out there that pimps do to manipulate these girls so that even though there aren't these chains like Beth are saying, they feel like they can't ever leave. And even if they did try to leave, no one would want them. And so it's very...
it's a culture within itself.
Yeah, and it's very psychological, and so it's really fascinating too if you want to look into it a little more.
One form of trafficking we haven't mentioned that kind of different kind of, there's no pimp necessarily. There are people who are using minors to film pornography. That's called sex trafficking. They're using commercially for sex. They busted a guy in Phoenix just last year for using teenagers to film and sell sex. And there's no stable nothing. Sometimes they abduct these kids, or they coerce them or pay them to come in and do sex stuff and film it, and then sell the film. That's another form of trafficking.
Or they'll film it and use it as blackmail. So sometimes there are these girls that they're not actually in the custody of these perpetrators. They go home every night to their parents. They sneak in and the parents have no idea. But the reason why they keep going out at night is because the pimp says, I have this photo of you. And in the media we have that recent case as well where the girl killed herself because of what was done in the photos. And there's a lot of manipulation going on in these types of cases.
I think there was one more question over here. Yeah.
I feel like you all have given a really vivid picture and painted a picture of what it looks like from the viewpoint of the males and females who are being trafficked. But I hear parents and families looking for, I hear those words coming up, but what is that side of it too? Because I imagine there are family members looking for their loved ones who've gone missing or suddenly are no longer there. So can you maybe shed a little bit more light on, what that looks like, or those types of encounters that you've had, and, what resources do family members have to find their loved ones who've gone?
I don't think there is any. Like she was saying, it's a culture within itself, and you're sucked into that world. There's wife in-laws, there's pimp's arrest, there's rules to the game. So people can't get into the game. There isn't any that I know of. My parents, I guess my dad just went through bars downtown Minneapolis looking for me, and he couldn't find me.
I realized that's a huge hole, not just in Tucson, but nationally, in terms of what about these parents? I've been to international, national, regional conferences. No one ever mentioned the parents, not once. Because in many cases, there's no parents, or the parents are the problem. The conference Beth and I went to is a Department of Justice sponsored invitation-only national or national conference. After 3 days, I realized, hello, there are parents out there? I was the only parent there who had experienced this. And I said, does anyone care about the parents? Who's just, the apple of their eye just been destroyed? And there's nothing. No programs, no help, no counseling, no therapy. I had to find a place all the way back in Missouri to take my own daughter because no one even could tell me where to take her. There's a huge hole for that. So because I've been in that position, that's where I've had some parents call me whose children have been trafficked here in Tucson or disappeared. They want to talk to somebody that's been there, just like women want to talk to Beth because she's been there. The sad thing is, I have some therapists I know who can provide help to them, but there's nothing for them in particular. When I mentioned at the national conference, they all kind of went, oh, we should do something about that. And I think we should, but right now, there's ways to help find them. I hope you understand, with 2 million kids running away in America every year, about 1 million girls, 2,000 in Tucson, what do you think law enforcement does when they get a phone call about a runaway juvenile? They make a report. They can't look for them. I mean, you know, have an army of, they just don't look for them. And so parents are sitting here going, I'm looking for my kid.
I mean, literally what we did, we had a girl in town who we were trying to work with, who was a trafficker. And she ran, and literally we called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Got a little form, endangered runaways, a little poster, thought she went to San Diego, we sent it out to San Diego cops. Take a look, pass it out, muster, see if you guys see her. Take her out. It's literally a lot of things, that's what it boils down to. Because we're not going up to San Diego to, I wouldn't know where to look. I barely want to look in Tucson, you know, because I didn't work here. You know, I wasn't the guy who worked here for 8 years on the street. And even from a law enforcement perspective, you know, I look a lot more clean cut than I used to back in the day. But you know, you just can't roll up and have a conversation with these folks. It is a cultural. It's not part of what you all consider civil society.
And they're not stupid. It just fascinates me that people think pimps are stupid. They're one of the most intelligent. Do you know I went to the World Series? We bought tickets to the World Series. Now, I didn't go see it like a fool. I gave the tickets away. But we bought the tickets, the pimp bought the tickets, rented the hotel room that probably cost $300. So we could sit around and make all that money and get another girl, and we made a lot of money. I mean, they're not stupid. That was 30 years ago. You know, I worked the Mayo Clinic. I worked, you know, any big, like somebody mentioned the gem show, that's huge. And now we're getting the Super Bowl. And we need to be ready. We need to have awareness campaigns and let people know, if you come here and buy women and children in Tucson, you're going to jail. You know, let them know we're going to get you. I mean, I put that on, Willow Way has a Facebook page. And I put that on there all the time. Women and children are not for sale in Tucson. Because I'm hoping, if I say they're not, they're not the truth. You know, they're not for sale. And if you buy them here, I hope you go to jail. And if I can help you go, I'm going to help you go.
So we have, okay, one or two more, and then I have a closing question.
I just want to add something to what Jerry said, that a lot of these girls do run away. A lot of them, it's the first time they run away. A lot of them, it's the 20th time they run away. It's the 27th time they run away. It is crucial that parents call kids in as runaways, because although police don't spend all day looking for runaways, they can't. It puts them in the system. If girls are involved in any type of activity that could be criminal, anything, it could be just minor. If parents come in or if police come in contact with them, they're in the system as a runaway, and they're able to get their hands on them. So police do make attempts to try and locate kids. It's not something they can do all day, every day, but they do. They also know some kids, and so they may see them. They may know that they're a runaway, and if you don't call them in as a runaway, they don't have that information. So it's really crucial to do that, whether it's the first time, the 20th time, the 100th time. Always call kids in as runaways if they are.
There was a police officer in Marana earlier this year, intelligent man who did his homework. He pulled over a bunch of guys in a car for some reason, didn't like them, had them come out of the car. He found a person there with a young girl's identification. Being this girl's missing, contacts the mother and finds out, oh yeah, she's been gone for 3 weeks. That's how we found her with her mom. Because the guys in the car finally said, oh yeah, we dropped her off at this place, and then they kind of described it. If that police officer hadn't had that information, he would have found a purse and not had a clue. But he had the information, saw it, and made the connection and made the phone calls, which literally pulled this girl out of a place where she was being trafficked on the northwest side. So. And my daughter was found by police. That's rare. I know that's 27 years ago, but my father worked with TPD for 32 years as the head of their volunteers, so he was bugging all the detectives to be looking for his granddaughter, so I had a little advantage.
So is there one, okay.
Eric, you made a case earlier that the numbers shouldn't matter, whether there's one or whether there's 100,000, it shouldn't matter. And I thought you made a really good case. But isn't there still a need to identify more and more cases in order to get police chiefs to be able to assign people to work on the cases?
As with any issue, you have to scope it so that you're able to garner resources for it. At the end of the day, we're budget driven, and we respond to priorities based on various external pressures. If drugs are the problem, we're working drugs. If prostitution is the problem because the folks in the neighborhood are screaming that there's prostitution going on, fix it, they're going to go out there and arrest prostitutes. If we can put some perspective on the issue, make it important enough for the community to say, look, we're not going to tolerate trafficking in our community, sex trafficking. We don't care. We don't want it. We want law enforcement resources put against it. We want judicial resources put against it. We want you all to support the various NGOs. We want you to have diversion programs. We want legislative fixes. That comes from you guys. It can't come from you. It can't come from me. I'm prohibited from making those kinds of suggestions. That's how you get. I'm not making those suggestions, but that's how you get changes. Karen, you want to throw something?
I just wanted to add my 2 cents to that too. It's not just one. It's not just the police department, but in Tucson, I have to say, I'm a federal prosecutor and I do not speak for our office. In Tucson, the police have made, I think, great strides, and they are working with the FBI, and they do work with ICE, and they're doing it on their own, and they're making it a priority. All of these agents and these officers that just within the last year have made it a priority, even though we don't have the numbers. They do see the problem, and and I'm going to talk in general because it's not appropriate to talk about pending cases, but in general, the ones that we've seen come through the federal court are runaways. They're not even our kids, so to speak. They're someone's kids. They're just as important. But my point with that is, if they're running here, your kids are probably running somewhere else, and you would hope that these systems are in place nationally. But we have seen a greater participation and cooperation between federal and state that I've only been here 4 years, and I haven't seen it like I've seen it within the last year or so. And they realize it's not about the numbers, and there's only so much the officers can do, but they know how to do the certain on the street groundwork, and then the FBI, they have the resources to take it, up the next notch, find the girl over here, go fly over there, interview her, put her in the system and pick her up nationally. So it's not just one agency, it's everybody that has to work together.
The White House just put out a report April 8th, if you look online, and it's a plan. We're in phase 2 right now. There's 45 days for people like us, lay people, to make any changes. It's 60 pages, so it's a read. But it will fascinate you. I read it. And you can make a difference and put your 2 cents in. We only have 45 days to do it, and then after that, I think they have until fall then to publish or to put it all back together with everyone's input.
So that really does lead into the final question, and before I ask it, I just have to say this has been a profound experience for all of us, and we're so grateful that you all are willing to be here and to share. And maybe you'll stay after and answer a few more questions as well. But whenever we hear about something like this, it stirs up in all of us, what can we do? What can we, as individuals in this community, as people with children and families and loved ones that care, what are some things that you can tell us that we might put our action toward?
3 things come to mind for me. Raise awareness. It's huge. Even when the media reports on these cases, they mistake human trafficking for human smuggling, and they'll label things incorrectly. I've caught them several times. I've actually written to them to say, can you please issue a correction so that the public's accurately informed as to the issue? Because if we keep thinking this is a smuggling issue, and we feel like we understand what smuggling is about, we're not going to try to do anything about trafficking. So raise awareness and just share with the people in your social circle, the problem and what to look for. The second thing, as a prosecutor, I just have to say, when I pick juries, 90% of the pool wants to get out. They have all sorts of excuses. My child is in daycare. I can't be fair and impartial. These cases really bother me. And so while I have 2 seconds of your time, I just want to encourage you, if you are ever called to serve as a juror, it really is a privilege. And hopefully, you do get called to serve in one of these types of cases where you won't judge the victim just because she has that label, prostitute. Now you have a deeper understanding. You're more educated than most of the population in this community, and you'll give her testimony the weight that it deserves. It's a struggle that we have as prosecutors when we have victims that are not the perfect victim, according to what their expectation is. And the third one is continue to educate yourself on what you can do and support the organizations that are doing this work to support the victims. And actually one more, if you want, if you're in a position where you have some leverage to put pressure on agencies to make this a priority, just let your voice be known, that you believe that this is something that's important to you, that we as a community send out a message to traffickers that you are not going to get away with it here in Tucson. If that's important to you, raise your voice and let it be known.
I'll give you a couple of suggestions. One, we have a card on the table that suggestions what you can do to get involved. And I don't mean just with our NGO. Let me mention to you some other things happening in Tucson that you might want to plug into, or I say Pima County, because I actually don't know about it. Law enforcement and the courts really need your support. The successful case last year, the first one ever happened, is I wrote letters to the county attorney's office, to the TPD officers saying, thank you so much, congratulations. I got a letter back saying, we don't get these letters. I'm serious. No one ever thanks us for stuff like this. Do it. When they do these things, send them a letter and tell them how much you appreciate it. They realize, whoa, people in the community are paying attention. The University of Arizona has some resources. Dr. Colonel Walter is the assistant dean at the Honors College. She partners with us. I'll mention subject of slavery. She teaches a human trafficking course in Honors College, which I've taken. Take it. I'm serious. You're really good in education. You need to educate yourself. Don't just knee-jerk react, I gotta go do something. No, find out what's really going on. And we provide educational resources as well. Southern Arizona Against Slavery is called SAS. Indian Chelsea, where are they?
Well, we have a stable up in the courtyard afterwards.
Okay, they head up Southern Arizona Against Slavery. They do really excellent work in educating you about what's happening with legislation, what's going on politically in Tucson, Arizona, and on a national level. You can talk to them, get their emails, because there are times we have to write and call. We've had some real bogus things happening with some local senators and national, federal, and state level, just submarine anti-trafficking legislation. They need to hear from us.
Was Barrington? Is that his name?
Oh, yes.
No, we should mention his name. There was one guy that voted against what you talked about, increasing the penalties for people who use youth in prostitution. One man from Gila County. I do believe that was his name.
Representative Eddie Barnsworth.
Farnsworth, thank you. So yeah, email him. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Jerry. I just had to say that.
But that's how you stay on top of it. Our own Senator Kyle voted against, wouldn't even allow the Trafficking Reauthorization Act to come to a vote last year. Well, that's insane. Every year it's come to a vote, it's passed unanimously in both houses, so that was nuts. But if they don't hear from us, I don't think we care about it. So I encourage you to connect with SAS. Beth is one of the only people in Tucson doing something with victims. She needs support and help doing that. The university has some student groups operating there. International Justice Mission chapter. There's some young women start an organization called Half the Sky. This is a women's organization. You need to plug in these young, they're dynamic. University women who are taking a lead in this whole thing. They need your support and your help as well. So there are some resources here in the community you can plug into. And who knows, you might come up with an idea that no one else has thought of that's going to make a difference. So don't limit yourself with being an entrepreneur in this area. I would say though, what all of you can do is talk about it. Facebook, talk about it. I talk. I talk to my dentist, my dental hygienist, who then said, you know, I think that's happening next to my beauty parlor. I said, really? Well, it turns out, yeah. On the other side of the beauty parlor is a massage parlor where it's a sex shop, and she could hear it going on, so I just called the people I know, and they just, sure enough. So talk about it. You never know who you're going to talk to that's going to say, wait a minute, I heard something, I saw something. You're the best resource as a community. We can't have any cops.
Just a real quick thought. I'm not sitting here because I don't want you to call me. I do. Law enforcement does. You got to remember, law enforcement is there to serve you. And the natural response is that most folks don't want to deal with cops because it's unpleasant. And it's partly unpleasant because we describe a lot of the behavior, we describe some situations. Those are unpleasant situations. And a lot of times the cops are hard people. And we're not the nicest people when we use bad language. We have bad habits. And that's partly because we have to. But we need to hear from you so that we can do the right thing. And that's what the police are there for, to help. And you do that. But you got to call. It's uncomfortable. You got to pick the phone. You got to say, hey, because people think, oh, I'm going to be stupid. This is stupid. Nothing's really going on. They're going to think I'm an idiot. No, maybe. But who cares? Really, who cares? So call wrong.
I forgot to mention the Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts of Arizona here in Tucson have been very active, providing community training and training for their staff and volunteers. So if you want to get involved in the Girl Scouts to fight trafficking, they've got an active ongoing program.
And yes, I need lots of help. I mean, I'm paying for a webpage that's not up yet because I'm not good with that. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could do. You could people talk about awareness. Everybody, needs to hear about this and to know what's happening and to know that it could happen to them and their families, because we have this big NIMBY thing. Oh no, that doesn't happen in my backyard, but it does. It's happening in everyone's backyard. You could organize a fundraiser. We need a place for these women to be able to go, and they do turn 18. And just because they turn 18 doesn't mean that they're not entitled to services. It's because we missed them when they were juveniles. That's how come they turned 18. I have to tell you really quick, I had 2 clients. One was out 20 years, one was out 15 on the streets. One of them works for the Department of Health in Minnesota, and the other one is a women's program manager. So they do get out, even if they've been out there and strong enough. If they have opportunities, they will get out. So, you could volunteer to help do that. Maybe get a housing program somewhere here just for prostituted individuals. Boys are prostitutes too. We need to do something about that. We're just starting here in Arizona to make things happen, especially in Tucson. So, there's lots of different stuff. So if you're sitting around and need something to do, give me a call. And I will hook you up, okay?
You mentioned one of the key things. We provide, our real focus is awareness, prevention, education. We have trained people who will come into a school, parent group, youth group, and educate youth or parents on how to prevent becoming victims. We have a 3-part curriculum for sex trafficking, or a 3-part curriculum for pornography. That's a huge problem. Or we can do a one-time session. And we also need people who can go give those presentations. We need to talk to Megan Goodman. In fact, she trains our people to do that. If you're in a school, go and talk to the principal and teacher and say, hey, can we get some prevention education in our school? That's how it happens, not when we call. It happens when a parent calls. They want to. We are in the process of working through logistics with the Tucson Police Department and K-Gun 9 and a couple other TV stations to provide community-wide parent awareness trainings in the next couple of months. Because the recent cases that have gone public, now parents are going, oh my gosh, how do I protect my kid on the internet? Good question. Where's the answer? So TPD is going to provide the training, we're going to organize it and get the news media to advertise it for free. So people in places where you could say, can we bring some to provide training? That's how we get there.
I threw a number up there. That's the National Human Trafficking Hotline that's operated by the Polaris Project. Yes, and I remember that. There's also a local number that will directly connect with the FBI. Don't be afraid just because they're FBI. They're wanting you to call them if you suspect witnessing any type of human trafficking happening in your area. So that's the national hotline. They'll still connect to someone locally. They have a huge network. But Karen, do you want to give that number?
Well, it's 520, then it's 623-4306. And that's the number the FBI has designated for locally.
It's 623 what?
623-4306.
You know, we do street outreach. I need help doing that. I need street outreach workers, people who are not afraid to go out in the street and hand out pack of condoms and stay safe. So, you know, if you're interested in something like that, call us. We meet every Friday usually at Ward 6 office. So,
I forgot to mention, Court of Hope, keeping, they're an NGO locally, been operating about 7 years here. These are women who go into the adult businesses in Tucson and talk to the women, hopefully they're all over 18, but they're not always over 18, and provide them with all kinds of things free, especially different times of the year. Cosmetic items, toiletry items, food items, just to get to know them, and once in a while they come across minors in those situations, which we then can report to police. This is one way you can have direct contact with women who are being used, and I agree with that. They're always being used and abused in the sex industry here in Tucson. We went to the strip clubs and the adult clubs here. Called Court of Hope.
and 18, forget that number 18. Everyone's entitled to help to get out, whether they're 25, 36, doesn't matter. I mean, they should be able to get out. I know that we're worried about youth, but it's like when you're trafficked. I was trafficked at 16, and when I got out at 22, I think I was still kind of 16, you know? Because I wasn't nourished, I wasn't nurtured, I wasn't, none of that. You know what my trafficker did? I went to work, when I got done with work, I'd take a shower, he'd hand me a roll of quarters, and I'd go play Miss Pac-Man for years. I can beat anybody at Miss Pac-Man. Because that's what I did, because I was a kid. That's what I wanted. And for him, for me to give him the money, he gave me the roll of quarters, I was happy. You know? I mean, he got me high. And the roll of quarters, because, you know, you can't think about it, you know, it was horrible. But, yeah.
So did they ever, were you able to ever, like, catch your pin?
You know, my pin got smashed. Karma, this has got between a loading dock and a truck, right? Took away his manhood and everything. I mean, he got millions of dollars because that happened to him, but he can't have sex. It's, you know, that was karma. That was God taking care of him. So technically, I guess I could sue him now, huh? But I think, you know, I don't know, he's punished me. He can't have sex. He can't have kids. He never had kids. He, yeah, so I think he got what was coming to him. But yeah, sometimes I know of girls, there was a girl who sat in jail, well, 6 months she sat in jail for this fool. It's like, he would not do that, you know? That's how scared these girls are, though, you know? And she got out, and she told me she was, I think she's in the midst of suing him now. And now we have some federal law where you can sue your dad.
So you get retribution, not retribution. Restitution.
Can you imagine restitution? Because I made a lot of money every day, and that was back a long time ago. I mean, we can get a lot of money. I should do that. I should take the rest of his millions that he hasn't spent yet. But yeah. Yeah, I know his name.
Okay, well, we would just all like to thank you again for coming and helping us create awareness, and a lot of numbers and terms have been thrown around, so if everybody wants to just make sure to visit the tables on the way out, all the nonprofits that are here, and get that information in your hand. The Junior League would like to give you guys some gifts for coming and helping. We know this is on your own time. We have cookbooks, and it's something that we do here. here, and so we'd like to